High levels of dependence on oil rents have always tended to reinforce the regime in power. This kind of explains this mystery, why this party has been in power for 40 years, which is almost unprecedented in the history of Canada. The other thing is that they lose their statecraft, right? They don't have to worry about dollars and scarcity in terms of income, and so they get lazy and fat and negligent and just damn stupid. And one of the most appalling things about this province has been the growing loss of statecraft, of the ability of the government to actually plan, make good decisions, and put forward good public policy that benefits all Albertans. And a political scientist by the name of Terry Lynn Carl at Stanford University started these studies back in the 1970s in Venezuela. And it's absolutely fascinating, and I just want to share some of her insights with you. The first thing a petrostate generally does is lower taxes to make you feel warm and fuzzy about the fact that you have hydrocarbons underneath the ground. And they stop running on taxes and they start running on petrodollars. And that has a lot of consequences, because remember what the American Revolution was all about. It was all about the idea that there was no representation without taxation. And so when you are no longer being taxed for your government services, but those government services are being paid and provided for by hydrocarbon companies, big oil, big gas, then in the end you're slowly going to lose your representation as your government comes to represent more and more the interests of hydrocarbons and hydrocarbon developers. And it's not a conspiracy, and it's nothing like that at all. It's just almost the natural development of things over time. So they lower taxes, then they overspend like hell. If anyone looks at the volatility of budget spending in this province, you're struck by the fact that there doesn't appear to have been a conservative in power for 40 years. The other thing, really startling thing, is that when you have this money and you have access to this cheap cash and you don't have to work very hard for it, right? For the royalties and the rents and the profits coming off oil and gas, then you tend to start behaving in weird ways. You behave like the oil industry, which is extremely concentrated. And you start to concentrate power. And I can give you any number of examples in this province, from our big super health board to our new proposal to have a big super energy board. So, one board in control of everything. Now, I sort of thought that the Soviets went through this and in the 60s and 70s, and it didn't work very well, but it's very much a characteristic of petrostates. The other thing is that they lose their statecraft, right? They don't have to worry about dollars and scarcity in terms of income, and so they get lazy and fat and negligent and just damn stupid. And one of the most appalling things about this province has been the growing loss of statecraft, of the ability of the government to actually plan, make good decisions, and put forward good public policy that benefits all Albertans. Now, Terry Carl put it this way. She said, petrostates rely on an unsustainable development trajectory fueled by an inexhaustible resource, and the very returns produced by this resource form an implacable barrier to change. And a petrostate, by definition, usually gets about 20% of its revenue from hydrocarbons on an annual basis, and we're there in spades and have been for a long, long time. And just look at the volatility of that revenue, and look at the volatility of spending and cutbacks in the province. That's what happens when you marry a province to a resource as volatile as oil. Now here's just talking about tax advantage. We don't like taxes in this province. There's no sales tax, low corporate tax, low every form of tax. Same thing in Texas, same thing in Louisiana, same thing in Wyoming, same thing in Alaska. By God, if you go to the Middle East, the same thing in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia as well. So the bargain and the compromise has been made that everyone will be happy with low taxes, and therefore you don't really need to comment or pass judgment on how the government behaves. Petrostates tend to have long periods of extended rule of one party or one individual. King Ralph ruled for 14 years. And you find similar patterns in Texas, in Louisiana, Wyoming. Of course, in a place like Libya. I mean, Muammar Gaddafi ruled for 42 years. The PRI of Mexico ruled for 70 years, and on it goes. Now, when taxation is absent, populations tend to be politically inactive, relatively obedient, and surprisingly loyal. And that would be a good definition of Albertans. And as a result, over time, we have really stopped participating in the democratic process, and fewer of us are voting, less than 40% now. Are we saving any of this money for the future? Are we investing any of it wisely? Are we thinking about our children? Norway is. They've saved more than 500 billion. But here's Alberta. We're not saving. We really have no savings plan whatsoever. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, in their report recently, came out and said, you know, at the moment, Alberta has no framework or long-term goals for the use or investment of resource revenues. If that's the case, why the hell are we fracking our landscapes? What for? The other thing about all of this is, and I just mentioned this, the high levels of dependence on oil rents have always tended to reinforce the regime in power. This kind of explains this mystery, why this party has been in power for 40 years, which is almost unprecedented in the history of Canada. The Democratic Party, by the way, based on oil rents in Texas, ruled Texas for more than 60 years. The PRI in Mexico, based on Mexico's oil wealth, ruled for 70 years. All right, so that's the nature of the petrostate. We live in a place that is a bit weird, a bit dysfunctional, and a bit bent out of shape by oil, wealth, and the money. All right, now what about a regulator? We supposedly have a regulator, we have had one for 70 years, that's supposed to take care of a lot of these issues. And that's the Energy Resources Conservation Board, and here's their mandate: to ensure discovery and development of energy resources takes place in a manner that is fair, responsible, and in the public interest. One of the first problems they have is the fact that they get 63% of their funding from industry. 63%. And this all comes in the form of industry levies. And whenever I bring up this fact, I get usually a nasty letter from Tom Neufeld at the ERCB. They have an extraordinarily big media department, and they are the only people that seem to speak for the board. You know, the board appears to be faceless, except for these PR guys. And so the PR guys said, well, you know, Andrew, your 63% thing, that's not right. The industry portion of our funding is a levy. It is like a tax. Energy companies do not have the option of paying levies to the ERCB. Companies are required by regulation to pay. To imply that companies can somehow influence ERCB decisions because of this is akin to suggesting you can influence the actions of the police because you pay taxes. Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. We have 100 companies in this province pay 90% of the budget for the ERCB. Now, how would you feel if 100 individuals in Calgary paid 63% of the police budget? Would you be comfortable with that fact? I don't think you would be. Because if you had a problem and an issue, you know who's going to get the most attention and the fastest attention. Now, here's one of Neil McCrank. He was a chairman of the board from 1998 to 2007. And we find in regulators that have been captured by industry, the expression is the revolving door. And here we go, here's the revolving door. And so where did Neil McCrank go after he was supposedly working for us at the ERCB? Well, he went to Lardner Gervais, big law firm in Calgary that deals with the oil patch, and he went on to Petrobank, an oil sands company. And so my question is, did Neil McCrank ever actually work for us in that whole period? The revolving door again, who replaced him? Well, here's our new chair, Dan McFadden. And where did Dan McFadden come from? Well, Dan McFadden was Vice President, Regulatory Affairs and Public Policy, Canadian Energy Pipeline Association.